So, continuing on the discussion of my roadmap, following the discussion of the brain and its connection to earworms, I'll discuss the connection music has to the brain and connecting these first two topics together by discussing musicians' predisposition towards earworms and how music plays a role in our brain's development, similar to language. I think that'll be a crucial part of discussing that. Then I will discuss some causes of earworms, as I said earlier. So, in order to not have this be just the exact same thing as my first video, I'll talk a little more comprehensively about what I want my presentation to look like specifically for each of these parts. But that will come after my roadmap. So, causes of earworms, various causes, blah, blah, blah. Repeated listening being one of those causes, so on and so forth. And then continue on talking about earworms, then discuss earworms in pop culture, then some anecdotes about earworms. There are some very interesting tales throughout history that relate earworms to people's everyday lives and some very important aspects of history and business and other things such as that. Then there will be some discussion of chord progressions and how those play a role in our anticipation of things, because that those have played a relatively large role. And then one of the last areas that I'll be discussing are some top 10 lists of most catchy songs, and that will again apply to the relatability of to the audience of understanding better why songs get stuck in their head and relating to others who have said very similar things to probably what they are experiencing by being able to internalize this earworm process, so to speak. So, in terms of how I want these to look comprehensively, so beginning with so the initial anecdote at the beginning of the story in order to provide relatability. So, ideally in my presentation, Prezi going, move on to the next slide. It will be something along the lines of someone sitting in their car, and maybe a picture of a car radio, and I might have a sound clip embedded that when I click on a part of the car radio or click below it, Bohemian Rhapsody will play, which is the song I reference in my big board paper, and I will play a very short clip of that, just enough to maybe instill an earworm in people's heads, and use that as a part of my introduction. I'll then say my name, have title slide pop up, and then I will continue on further with my presentation. Next slide, then some history. So the origin of music. So may include a picture of some very early instruments, some very early pictures of people singing, or something along those lines. Then moving on from there, I discuss the connection between food and music, and how the brain isn't necessarily predisposed to enjoy these things specifically, as these are not necessarily survival-based tactics, but the brain has different aspects within the brain that can connect in order to describe things as pleasurable, such as cheesecake or ice cream. Like, those are not naturally occurring things, but humanity has created these things out of desire for something enjoyable or pleasurable to our palates, which we would not have come across necessarily otherwise. I guess there is argument for the idea that ice cream and cheesecake are technically naturally occurring because at some point humans created them. But in this sense, I'm specifically relating it to this idea that music is something that just more or less happened and was not necessarily something we stumbled across, but something we refined and something that we honed and something that we created as humans to enjoy amongst each other. So, next, I will talk about a little about some studies that have been done and connections in terms of concerts and experiencing music in a group setting, and the importance of that and how that relates to earworms and our experiences with music and somewhat the origin itself. Then I will discuss the brain and the way that is honed by listening to music. Music is often described very similarly to language, And so in this slide, I may have music notes and then letters and connecting how music is actually played in terms of letters. You've got A through G, and all those notes are described by a letter, which is kind of this interesting parallel between language and music, because technically in music you're stringing together letters in order to form phrases, the same, both terms being used in similar contexts but not in necessarily the same way. And music has an interesting role in doing that. And obviously, um, that is in terms of instrumental music, but in terms of sung music, you're combining literal language as well as language of actual language of whatever language you speak, and so that is a crucial connection. And so obviously I'll illustrate this in my presentation. Picture of letters, picture of notes, with letters. Again, potentially a clip of someone playing music or someone or something that is a quote from somebody that relates these two topics. Next, we will move on to discussing the origin of the word earworm and where it comes from. And I will obviously, I think that's a good place to toss up a quote or toss up a picture of this word being phonetically pronounced so people understand it better, and discuss further, why some of those things occur, and really start delving into earworms. And then I'll talk about earworm causes. I'll use some illustrations here in terms of what causes these things, such as stress. Maybe a stock photo of someone being stressed. That is typically something that people find hilarious or funny in some ways, as that is something they can relate to, and get you out from there. Next slide. That about people experiencing earworms and how long they last. There's some other things that I'll have to discuss, but then I'll move on to stress, obviously. Amusia, the concept of not being able to understand the music or differentiate between notes, which is a cognitive, not necessarily disability, but a lack of understanding. And so these amusics are then unable to experience earworms, and therefore that kind of eliminates them from this conversation, which is interesting because so many people experience earworms. It's this relatively universal thing. The fact that there are some who do not, in fact, experience earworms provides an interesting thought to further into the human brain itself. Sorry, I came from a track meet just now. I've been out of the house for 12 hours, and I'm a little bit tired. But I will persevere for you, Mr. Smith. So, then there's this interesting idea in the mind of the phonological loop, which is actually said to be the cause, the immediate cause of earworms in the brain. And it's the way the brain processes short little snippets of words, and the spoken word. So in this case, the phonological loop will take in music as opposed to spoken word. So usually it would take in a snippet of spoken word, decide if it needs to be stored in the long-term memory, but instead, if in some cases it will be thrown away, it'll be deemed useless information, and that can be attributed to kind of this in one ear out the other, where information is not actually retained because the brain deems the words being input into the brain as lower priority than what the brain is currently processing, or something along those lines. And in terms of music, the brain can input these snippets of music not too long at a time, and start repeating it in the brain, because as it tries to determine whether it should be kept in short term or long term, it repeats over and over in order to attempt to reach this establishment of usefulness. And so when it gets stuck in this phonological loop, it will get caught there, and it'll repeat over and over and over again, because the brain gets stuck on it. It gets intrigued by this music, so it needs to keep playing it over and over to better understand it. So in this case, I'll illustrate the image from the study about the phonological loop and describing the loop, and then also potentially maybe a sillier image in terms of better humoring the audience in terms of a relatively serious neurological topic that might not be as enjoyable otherwise. Then anecdotes: Mark Twain, Dr. Herman guitar knower, and then some stories from about Mozart and so on. And so I might toss a picture of Twain's book or Twain himself, and then Mozart, and then E.B. White, and or so on and so forth, and discuss their different anecdotes. That slide will be left up for a while, as that is something I could talk about relatively extensively. Then also, talk about some people's other experiences with earworms and so on, because that is a very important thing. Then I will get into the top 10 lists, discussing earworms themselves. Up here on this time, I will make sure to use words. I'll actually show each top 10 list as I say them, and then go on to speak on why that might be the case. I'll talk about the someone came up with a chart or a mathematical formula that's not actually 100% mathematical, but is theoretical as well as mathematical, in the sense that it combines a mathematical formula with some theoretical or subjective ideals. And so then I'll discuss that and how that plays into some of these, and how this formula can actually be relatively accurate in terms of better understanding them. And then I'll compare the United States and the UK in terms of their music that are rated in such a way. And then I'll talk about cures, and that will more or less wrap up my my presentation itself. Then I'll obviously use this time for audience participation, and ask them, what they considered, if they still have that earworm, and then ask for questions, which I hope there'll be a few of. And like you suggested, I may plant some people in the audience to ask questions, so that I don't fail that part of my big board. The next part and final part of this video will be about my community service outreach and what I'll be doing for that. So I will see you in that part of my video.